Thank you. Good one. Hi, everybody. So thanks for those fabulous presentations, Minister Bartolo and Vivian. A couple of things really came out to me. One was this notion that it's bigger than technology, that we have a structural problem. Power imbalances in society are a challenge. And then, of course, Vivian talked about the need for safe spaces and the rights of individuals to feel like they are participating in civil society. And I think that those two concepts come together in the sense that we need to understand exactly what the power structure is that we are working in today. And the Minister is absolutely right that it's not just technology, it's everything else. But I think one of the things that's been a problem for us is we've had our capacity to understand that structure confused because we don't fully get it. And that structure is very much tied to the technological framework in which our information now flows. It's not about a technological solution, it is very much a social solution. But it is a social solution that must be informed by the fact that I think we are actually living in the Matrix. You guys know that movie, right? It's an awareness problem. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what the awareness problem and think through maybe what some of the solutions are. This is not easy stuff, but we need to deal with it. So this is the town of Valletta in Macedonia. And those of us, I live in the United States, we've been a long debate about foreign interference in our democracy, of course. The idea that Russia was planting fake news and driving our election was a big concern of the Mueller report and so forth. Well, these guys were participating as well. This was a website produced by some kids there. I would say kids, they were teenagers, maybe even sort of younger, 20-somethings. And their website was a news site. But they weren't making news about Valletta or about Macedonia. They were writing news about the biggest stories of them all. This was in 2016 during the US election, and there were stories going out such as Pope Francis endorses Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton indicted by the FBI, right? Made up stories, not founded in what most of us would agree are facts, and I do agree with the minister that facts are all relative. For most of us, that just simply wasn't true, right? But these stories had huge impact, and their website was making a lot of money because they figured out how to get the attention, how to get the dopamine releases, how to get the rises of all these conservative voters who were really excited about this and were sharing and retweeting their stories and sending eyeballs back to their website and therefore getting ads revenue, Google Sense, money being raised by just making stuff up, okay? Whoops. And then this is the kind of stuff they were doing. Government of Kenya has released Obama's authentic birth certificate. But the real problem is not so much them, it's the structure in which this was happening. So the real problem is something that Facebook calls like audiences. Facebook's interests are quite different from those who publish on their website. Facebook's interests are to manage platform advertisers, the people who pay money on the sidelines to make sure that there's an audience that they can always rely on as there. And the way that Facebook had constructed this was to say, everybody who thinks the same is going to like the same things, and therefore if we can show them the same news feed all the time, they will get the same dopamine release, they will be excited by the same things, the same confirmation bias will happen, and they will share things. And they'll keep going. And this is perfect for platform advertisers because now they've got a reliable audience, definable audience that they know is there and they can target with their ads. This is Facebook's business model. It's driven by its shareholders. It's driven by its need for return on investment, its quarterly profits. This is the structural aspect of social media. The problem is, what that does is it creates a bias in favor of fake news, of the Macedonian kids who aren't spending a single cent other than maybe the hosting costs of their website, to come up with stuff that is just complete and utter bullshit. And you compare that to the costs that the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or CNN, or the Times of Malta, or any normal news organization has to spend to try to get the story right, to have both sides of the story, to get their facts, to have a structure of editorial consistency with an editor-in-chief and a line editor and a copy editor and a lawyer, and spend money on sending people out to the trenches to find out what's going on. That massive cost to try to get the facts straight is being out-competed for these eyeballs because of an algorithm that's driving eyeballs to the Macedonian lies. Right? This is not blaming Macedonia, by the way, but in this case it was in Macedonia. This is a huge problem. This is a massive problem. The incentives are structured around not telling the truth. We have a big problem, folks. So the way that we tend to think about it is like, okay, we have to censor. Facebook, you're responsible. This is your responsibility. You're an editor now. You're not a platform. You're a publisher. You need to censor, all right? Because look what you're letting get up on your platform. But Facebook isn't a publisher. It's a platform. We all understand it as a place that we are free, to Vivian's point, to have the capacity to participate in civil society. It's a wonderful idea. There's a platform, a place I can put my views up on. I don't want to be censored. And how are they going to have an editor that's going to edit every single piece that's posted on Facebook? It's impossible. But that's what we're calling them to do, and they are trying to do it. And so they're putting up algorithms, and they're employing people in the Philippines to go through everything, and they make really crazy decisions, such as censoring this famous photo, because it fell into the realm of obscenities. The most important photo of the Vietnam War that tells us the horrors of what happened, and Facebook's censoring it. We can't rely on censorship. It is not the model. It is not what we want. Most importantly, it is against the very principle of why we created the internet. The internet itself, the vision, the thing that drove us to get there was this idea that the internet was going to be an open bazaar of ideas, a place where everyone would have a voice, and that out of that, we would get to pick the best ideas. That it would be chaos, yes, that it would be messy and noisy, and it would be very, very disruptive, but we as a society would thrive on the wisdom of the crowd, and the best ideas would rise to the top. That's what we intended the internet to be. This was Internet 1.0, the naive utopianism of the very early 90s, late 80s, in fact. But then we got Internet 2.0, and that's the world we live in right now. And Internet 2.0 has completely distorted that picture. Because that open bazaar, where we're all supposed to be competing on a level playing field for each other's attention and each other's support for our ideas, doesn't work like that. We're competing for the love of the social media's algorithms. Our ideas only win if they happen to comply with what Facebook's secret algorithm, by the way, we don't get to see what that algorithm looks like. What that algorithm decides is going to be delivered to the audiences that it creates. It curates news and it curates audience. We're fighting, we're competing with each other for that. And that algorithm is acting in the interest solely of the shareholders of Facebook or of Google or of Twitter or of whoever else. Their business model is defining who gets to see what and who doesn't. That is a complete distortion of what this broad idea of the World Wide Web was supposed to be about. And I hate to be gloomy, and look, this is a rather gloomy title that Alex has given us. I'm going to try to move to a more positive take on this, but I'm just going to take it a little bit further. I don't know how many of you have read Shoshana Zuboff's brilliant book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and I recommend that you do, but I always recommend that if you do read it, pour yourself a stiff drink and have a little bit of a whiskey as you read it, because it's tough. It's really hard stuff. I mentioned the word matrix. I think this is the moment when I read this book, I thought, yes, we are living in the matrix. Because she's saying that through this process of manipulating and curating audience, these social media platforms are not just kind of neutrally controlling the flow of information. They are mining information from us. They're watching what we click, what we follow, and relearning and tweaking their algorithms. And you know what they're doing with it? They're turning it back on us. So Bruce Schneier, a famous cybersecurity expert, made a great comment that many of us have used over the years, and that is that Facebook is, you are not Facebook's customer, you are Facebook's product. What she's saying is that, in fact, we're Facebook's quarry. We are a mine, and our data is being mined and then turned back on us and our behavior. So, we need to be really aware of this. Alex and I were talking last night about influencers and how influencers are a key part of the social media fabric right now. And it seems, for those oldies like us, a little bit hard to handle because it seems very superficial. People just taking selfies of themselves all the time. And we can be critical, right, of that younger generation. But in reality, it's a reflection of this wonderful part of the internet that everybody has a voice. That should be a really good thing. Where I think these two views come together is the problem that this world, those photos, those selfies, the filters on your phone, all of those things are constructed in the interest of this particular power structure. So awareness, being out there and talking to the world is wonderful, but be aware of the fact that all of your instincts, all of what you're doing, are part of a machine that's driving you in this way. It's real. Surveillance capitalism. She's given us a word now, or at least two words, to use, and a bunch of other words as well. We now have a taxonomy to focus on what the problem is, but we are living in that matrix. So we need to be aware of the fact that as we're talking about it, we're part of it. Okay, so to break down what the problem is, we also have to start thinking about this concept of the attention economy. It starts very young. Basically, digital media is everything. Content is king is a common phrase, and I would argue that it's bigger than ever. It drives us. It's the starting point for the entire economy. We live in the information economy, and so this is the starting point. And it's really about the attention, because the way that information is divvied out and who gets to see it and what is a question of how we pay for this scarce resource. Attention is the one resource that is not being turned into abundance by software, right? Mark Andreessen says software is eating the world, and what he means by that is everything starts to become digitalized, everything becomes abundant. Not our attention. We only have 24 hours, 7 days, 365. It is the most important finite resource in the world, and we are competing for it. We're all competing for everybody's attention. So we need to understand that, right? So that's the key component of this. And unfortunately, I think the way that it works is really, really problematic. Now, I've talked a little bit about this problem, but let's think about this structure as it is now. So I have a company called Streambed Media, and we're trying to grapple with some of these core problems of the internet. Social media platforms are in the middle. They are the data intermediators, right? So data is everything. If I know what the traffic flow is, I know how many people are liking my things, how many people are reading it, at what time. I can redesign my products, redesign my stories. I need to have that information from my marketplace. And as a creator, this guy down here, you could put the word influencer there if you want. You could say publisher, you could say news organization. I need to know what my audience is doing. But so do brands, and so do investors. But all of them are caught up in what these guys in the middle are telling us what the data is telling us. So the data is completely controlled. It's a black hole of data. We don't know what the data is. It's parceled out. So what we need to do is shift the structure. So we're calling this the engagement economy. Like, how do we make it so that the creators are in the middle, the publishers, the ones who are actually driving it, so that they get the data to them, and then brands and investors and others are able to set their prices around what it is the audience actually wants. We need the feedback loop between the audience and the creators to give us a sense. And we think creators need to be at the center of it. They get full audience data visibility, and they can directly engage with audience. Now, the challenge is social media platforms is the way all of us get our information, whether we like it or not. It is completely dependent upon the network effect. Because there are 2.7 billion people on Facebook, there are 2.7 billion people on Facebook, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So how do we break out of that cycle? We need to think hard about incentive models that would allow us to create a different feedback loop. Because you just can't create another Facebook overnight. I mean, we could bring all the governments of the world together and say, right, that's it, shut the thing down. We'll create a different social media platform that's run by the governments of the world. How do you think that'll run? So what we need instead is a model that starts to build incentive systems that allow audiences to directly engage with their creators and feed data back to the creators. That's one thing that I'm working on. Streambed, a very small piece of that. And where it starts, we believe, is to grapple with a problem that I think gets termed in this light. So if you think about the way that the internet economy has evolved in recent years, we hear a lot about the gig economy and the sharing economy, and we've got now pretty much every industry in the world moving to a peer-to-peer platform, right? We have Uber, we have Bolt here in Malta, it seems, for ride sharing. So transit and mobility is now peer-to-peer, sort of, right? We know Uber's in the middle, but you can act in that way. Airbnb for houses, right? Etsy for another form of creative content. This is a type of content that is actually physical, right? Crafts can now be sold online if I'm a craftsman, and I can sell to anybody in the world because they like my jewelry or my ceramics or whatever. That's great, right? It's a wonderful disintermediating, empowering concept, and it is actually, I would argue, a reflection of one of the great ideas of the internet. Why is there no Etsy for digital content, though? Why has there not been? It's the most important industry in the world. Information. Why isn't it possible to have a peer-to-peer market for digital content? Well, the argument is that we don't know how to define what a digital asset is. There's no such thing as digital scarcity, or at least there wasn't until Bitcoin came along, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and blockchain and why this strange concept is relevant here. But basically, before the internet, you could have something which was called the first sale doctrine. It was a legal concept that said, all right, copyright is owned as an asset. It's an intellectual property asset owned by the writer. But you, as the buyer of a book, a physical vessel that is a copy of that copyright, can own that thing, that piece of it, and you can resell it. So you can have a second-hand bookstore. But the digital economy came along, and lawyers went, wait. We can't do this anymore because anybody can just copy anything like that. It's much harder to copy a 350-page book in physical form and then resell it. You could do it, but it's hard, than it is to do it with a digital book, right? PDF, copy and paste, done. So because of that replicability, that ability to just duplicate anything, lawyers stepped in and said, all right, we can't have the first sale document in the digital realm. Instead, we have to have digital rights management. We have a licensing rule. So basically, when you get a Kindle book, you don't own a book. You own a right from Amazon to use this book. And if you find a way around those rights and sell it, you'll be sued, right? So this is the structure we built. We built a legal structure that says, it's a litigious one, that says anything out of the rules you basically get sued. So basically what that meant is that in this sharing economy we have, where everybody is retweeting and sharing and everything else, in fact, Twitter and Facebook and the others, they built a blanket licensing law that says if you participate on this platform, you are actually conceding to have all of your content shared by anybody. You're basically writing away your copyright so that Twitter could be allowed to survive. It had to write into its own contract a law that kind of meant this thing could happen. But the problem is, we're trying to bring power back to the creators, the ones who actually build this. I'm not saying that we should have, information doesn't want to be free and that we shouldn't have a structure where we can, easily share and collaborate and work with creative works. I think that's extremely important. But we do need to at least be able to identify the asset. And it's because we can't identify the asset, because there's no such thing as digital scarcity. So I don't know, is this the first one or this the first one? Which is the first one? That question means we can't have an Airbnb for content or an Etsy for content. So we need to figure this out. And one of the problems is, okay, we need an index. We need an index, a system that is public. The internet is a public, open source platform. So we need a public index for keeping track of what that content is. Where did it start? Who is the rightful owner? What's it about? A kind of a library catalog, if you like, right? We have an index. It's this one. What's the problem with that? It's a private index. It is managed, it's a card catalog, if you like a library card catalog, but it's run by a company that has its own profit motives, right? And all of the distortions mean we're not able to work with it because any other platform's not going to want to use their index. So we need a public index, and this is what a blockchain can potentially be, right? Because nobody can change the sequence of blocks. Now, this is a rather nerdy looking thing, so I won't go into it. I just needed to illustrate this in somehow. Blockchains are complicated, but they are unchangeable when they work. So they are a record. It's a data structure that can take in data, and you can't change it. And because you can't change it, you can now start to create digital scarcity. When Bitcoin came along, the most amazing thing about it was that it was a digital store of value that was digital. It was a unique piece of property. If I have a Bitcoin and I send you a Bitcoin, I no longer have that Bitcoin. This is what solved the money problem, right? Because you can't have a dollar that I can hang on to and then give you the second dollar. right? That wouldn't make money. Money can't be counterfeitable. It has to be transferable. So Bitcoin gave us this capacity the first time in the digital era to think about digital scarcity, and therefore to think that maybe we could start to get back to the first sale doctrine, that maybe we could start to identify digital content and give it value in the digital realm. This is one of the ideas that Streambet is working on. We're using something called the Open Index Protocol, which is a searchable index that resides above a blockchain, that we think is a really important open public index as a starting point for what our content providers will be able to define their work and build upon. So, let's think about some of these big questions though, right? Because we get back to the Macedonian kids and their fake news and everything else. And we need to think, okay, how could this structure work? The blockchain is not a panacea. It is not an easy solution. But there's ideas, there's concepts in here with digital scarcity, and another one that I want to talk about, which is consensus. So I totally agree with the minister that everybody's fact is a different fact. It's the way the world is, right? So all truth is really relative. I would say, though, man shaking his head, and I'm going to give you my answer to why I think that this is saying this, right? So, is the world round? Yes. It is. Does everybody agree that the world is round? No? Did I hear a no? Who said that? Right. There are people who think the world is flat, right? There are people who think the world is flat. Now, so look, I think the world is round. I tend to think that evolution is real, but there's a lot of people who think that evolution isn't, that the world wasn't first built in 7 days. I would say all truth is consensus. And the fact of the matter is, and maybe this will make you feel a little bit better, there are some facts that we like to think of as absolute truths, and I will happily call them absolute truths, but they're really just really strong consensus. There's a massive amount of agreement around it, such as the world being round. But look, let me ask a question. Can somebody tell me what the exact and precise GDP of the United States is? Tell me the exact one. I don't mean like, give it a few cents. What is the precise number? It's impossible, right? There's no such thing. And yet that GDP number is what we build our economy on, or the inflation number. Economic statistics are nothing but estimates that we all have a consensus around. And yet they work perfectly well. Well, not always, but they do reasonably well. We build an entire system on this. So some of you might know the work of Yuval Harari, who talked about the power of storytelling and how stories are what make human beings different from animals, because we have a capacity to agree on a set of facts, that we all have a consensus around. And with that consensus, we can do things. It doesn't matter that it's absolutely true or not. We just all agree that this is the best bet we have. So how do we get there? So part of it is like this question of fake news that you can think about in terms of this consensus. So in the blockchain world, we come up with consensus by putting a price on your capacity to lie or to act dishonestly. Bitcoin is built around a model that says if you want to change the record, it's going to cost you a massive amount of money to do so. You can do so, but you're really, really heavily disincentivized to do so. So it's a kind of a relative idea of truth in a way, right? So this concept is where I think we need to be thinking about this. Now, I'm not saying this is an easy solution. This is complicated. There's all sorts of social factors that need to come into this. But how we put a price on things is what it is. So I often, when I describe Bitcoin to people, I often use this idea. This is me sending money to my mum in Australia. And to confirm that I'm not lying, that it is truly I'm relinquishing control of that money, there are all these ledger keepers, and they are doing what's known as proof of work. They are going about a massively complicated computational problem, and it gets increasingly complicated as the system becomes bigger and bigger, and that computing cost is so expensive that for me to go back and change the ledger, I would have to take over every one of these guys and do all of their computational work to do it. So it gives us a cost-based approach to truth. And by truth, I mean consensus, the common understanding of what the facts are. And this is, I think, at least a starting point for thinking about. It doesn't have to be through proof of work mining. There can be all sorts of other ways in which we can start to think about how do we tax? How do we place a cost on lying? And one of the ways to think about it is in bot networks, right? So there's a company called Graphica in New York that just does the scariest of graphics. They draw these pictures of what happens when something like a disinformation campaign comes out of Russia or Iran, and it shows how these bot machines, like thousands of fake followers around the world, little machines just pumping out false information, take over our social networks and basically drive us down these paths that lead us to fake news. So that's a distribution network, right? So what happened with social media is that we created, we went from having physical infrastructure, whereby the distribution of our news was something that relied upon expensive hard assets like broadcast studios and printing presses, to the fact that our distribution network was nothing but a social network. Human beings. It's our neurons and our capacity to appeal to each other, our emotional connections, and it's really completely different. So that being the case, it's really a breach of the fundamental principles of what a fair distribution network should look like. If you can create fake followers, we need to somehow be able to define and put a cost on producing fake followers. And I think this model is one in which we can start to think about it, because it's very easy to actually look at an entire network and say, that's a bunch of bots, and that's not a bunch of bots. So the idea would be, you can run a bot army if you like, but it's going to cost you. It'll cost you millions and millions of dollars. So lying is possible, it's just going to cost you, right? This way of thinking about it has to be the way it is, because facts are relative, and because the system is entirely decentralized, and we can't put the genie back in the bottle. We have a decentralized internet, so we need to figure out how, in this decentralized structure, we're going to put a cost on what the rest of us agree is the consensus, or the other way around, okay? So one other thing I just want to talk about, hopefully this video works. If it doesn't, we'll just talk about it anyway. Not getting anything. Oh. I did see it briefly. Okay, it's not there. I figured this might happen. So deepfakes, just a little bit of a divergence, but I think an important one. We're all a bit worried about this, right? This idea that our brains are being tricked, because a video now, I was going to show you one that Jordan Peele did, a famous piece where he impersonates Obama, and you think it's Obama speaking because it's Jordan Peele, the American comedian's voice, giving Obama's voice, and then you realize it's actually him, right? So this is a social trick. This is the biggest challenge. This is not technology is doing it, but the real wedge point is our own brains. And so what this organization is all about, that I'm an advisor to, is called the Deep Trust Alliance. It's a newly formed outlet, and I'd actually love to see whether you guys could be involved in it, because it's an alliance that's bringing together news organizations, NGOs, artificial intelligence researchers, and people in the blockchain space. Because my view is that this solution is going to have to depend upon a combination of two things. A very sophisticated development of socially aware artificial intelligence that can constantly, in an open source environment, be developed to compete with the bad guys, right? And provenance, that is digital proofs, digital scarcity. So that the tracking of where did this video come from is one part of what the deepfake's all about is, and the other part of it is, is it different? And AI can see some of that, right? But we don't want AI to get too intelligent, because that's actually going to undermine everything. We need to have this thing developed in a socially constructive environment, which brings us back to the entire aspect of this conference that I think both of our speakers earlier have talked about, is that how do we create safe spaces in which we can talk about and develop solutions to this problem? And as I said, I think we're in the matrix. So even when we do this, right, if I speak, like I'm on Twitter all the time, and I know, and I'm slightly aware of how my dopamine releases are making me read one thing and push things out. But all of us are doing this. It's not just people like me. It's not just news organizations. It's also governments. They have their own PR outfits, their own social media teams. We're all conforming to the matrix. So we need institutions like this, which is going to bring collective, common civil society organizations, collectives of news organizations, of NGOs, of universities that work in AI, and startups like mine, to come together to figure out not what the solution is now, but what the ongoing solution is going to have to evolve to continue to be, because it's going to be an ongoing, ever-increasing problem. So I'll leave you with that. It's just this notion that organizations like the Deep Trust Alliance are one example, I would argue, of the collective civil society solutions that need to go on in this. And technology is part of the solution. Yes, AI, blockchain. But it really is the capacity to build a structure that allows us to step outside the matrix and say, all right, we've got to do this together. We know what our problem is. We're aware of it. How do we collectively fix it? And I'll leave you at that. Thanks very much.